The chains bit deep into her wrists as Captain Valerian Cross descended the ramp of his captured vessel, boots echoing against the crystalline floor of the Nexari throne room. The alien Empress towered before him, her chitinous form glistening, with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed with each calculated breath, but his eyes were drawn to the figure chained to the obsidian pillar behind her, a human woman. Bloodied but unbroken, her defiant gaze meeting his across the vast chamber. "You will translate for us, human?" the Empress hissed, her voice like grinding metal. "Your species' primitive tongue eludes our neural interfaces." Cross had been hunting pirates in the Outer Rim when the Nexari ambushed his patrol cruiser. Now, 6 months later, he served as their reluctant interpreter, watching helplessly as they conquered system after system. The woman chained to the pillar was their latest prize commander, Lyra Voss, the legendary Iron Wolf of the Terran Defense Fleet, whose single-ship raids had crippled 3 Nexari supply convoys. "She refuses to surrender her fleet positions," the Empress continued, her mandibles clicking with anticipation. "Perhaps watching her translator's execution will loosen her tongue." Cross felt his blood turn to ice. He'd seen what the Nex did to prisoners who outlived their usefulness. The neural extractors left nothing but empty husks, memories ripped away like pages from a burning book. But as he looked at Voss, he saw something in her eyes, not fear, but recognition. She knew exactly who he was. "Your Majesty," Cross said carefully, "perhaps I could speak with her first." Human to human. Sometimes our kind responds better to familiar voices. The Empress's bioluminescent patches flared brighter. "You have one cycle. If she does not yield the information, you both feed the neural As the guards dragged him toward the pillar, Cross caught the slight nod from Voss. She'd been waiting for this moment, just as he had. The Nexari thought they understood humans, their individualistic nature, their supposed weakness for They were about to learn how wrong they were. The chains around Voss's wrists were quantum-locked, designed to adapt to any escape attempt. But the Nexari had made one crucial error. They'd never encountered a human-bonded pair. "Commander Voss," Cross said, loudly enough for the Empress to hear, then dropped his voice to a whisper. "Initiate Protocol Omega-7. Her eyes widened slightly. The protocol was theoretical, developed by Terran Special Operations for exactly this scenario. 2 agents, captured separately, one gaining the trust of their captors while the other appeared to be the primary target. It required perfect timing, absolute trust, and a willingness to sacrifice everything for the mission. "You belong to me now," he whispered, his words carrying the coded activation phrase, "and I belong to you, until the last star burns out." The change in her was immediate. The defeated prisoner melted away, replaced by the predator who'd earned her calcin, hunting pirates in the void. Her breathing shifted to the combat rhythm they'd trained together, her muscles coiling with barely contained violence. The Empress leaned forward, mandibles clicking expectantly. "Well, does she speak?" Cross turned back to the alien ruler, his face a mask of defeat. She says she'll tell you everything you want to know, but only if you spare my life." The Empress's bioluminescent patches pulsed with satisfaction. "Excellent. Begin the extraction." As the guards moved to position the neural interface crown, neither the Empress nor her attendants noticed the almost imperceptible vibration beginning to emanate from the quantum chains. Protocol Omega-7 was more than just a rescue operation, was a declaration of war. The neural interface crown descended toward Voss's skull like a metallic spider, its probe-tipped legs extending with mechanical precision. Cross forced himself to maintain his mask of helpless desperation while counting the seconds until the quantum resonance reached critical frequency. The Nexari had made their second crucial error. They'd assumed human neural patterns followed the same predictable pathways as their own. "The crown will extract her memories of fleet positions first," the Empress explained, her voice carrying the satisfaction of a predator about to feed. "Then we'll see what other secrets hide in that primitive human brain." Voss's breathing had synchronized with the harmonic frequency of the quantum chains, her biohithms aligning with the resonance pattern in a way that should have been impossible. The Nexari scanners registered her elevated heart rate as fear, but Cross recognized it for what it truly was, a human nervous system pushing itself beyond theoretical limits. "Please," he said, injecting genuine desperation into his voice. "She's told you she'd cooperate. There's no need for the extraction." The Empress's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among her kind. "Your attachment to this female is touching, translator. We shall preserve her memories of you for our study of human emotional bonds. Perhaps we can weaponize them." The crown made contact with Voss's temples and the neural interface began its probe. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Voss's eyes rolled back, showing only whites, and her body went rigid against the chains. The neural feedback should have begun immediately, flooding the Nexari systems with her memories and strategic knowledge. Instead, the extraction console exploded in a shower of sparks. Impossible, the Empress hissed, her bioluminescent patches flaring from blue to angry red. The interface is perfect. It has never failed. Cross allowed himself a thin smile. You've never tried to interface with a human who doesn't want to. Be read. The truth was more complex and far more dangerous than the Empress could comprehend. Human neural patterns weren't just chaotic, they were actively resistant to forced extraction when the subject achieved the proper mental state. Military psychologists had discovered that humans in extreme emotional states could create neural feedback loops that overloaded most scanning equipment. The phenomenon was rare, requiring perfect conditions and extraordinary mental discipline, or, as in this case, a bond so deep that two minds could function as one. The resonance frequency is building, Voss whispered, her voice barely audible, but carrying clearly to Cross's enhanced hearing. 30 seconds to cascade failure. The quantum chains were vibrating visibly now, their molecular structure beginning to destabilize under the harmonic pressure. The Nexari guards stepped back, in confusion, their weapons useless against a threat they couldn't understand. Energy cascades were rippling through the chamber's crystalline walls, creating patterns of light that hurt to look at directly. What is happening? The Empress demanded, her voice rising to a shriek. Stop this immediately. I can't. Cross said, and for the first time in months, he was telling the complete truth. You wanted to know about human bonds. This is what happens when you try to break them. The chains shattered like glass, their quantum-locked mechanisms failing catastrophically as the resonance frequency peaked. Voss dropped to her knees, her wrists bloody but free, and raised her head to meet Cross's eyes. The look they shared contained 6 months of separation, years of partnership, and the absolute certainty that they would either escape together or die together. Now, she said. Cross dove toward the nearest guard, his months of apparent compliance exploding into sudden violence. The Nexari warrior never saw the strike coming, his weapon spinning away as Cross's enhanced reflexes took over. Behind him, he heard the distinctive sound of Voss moving, not running, but hunting. The Empress's scream of rage echoed through the chamber as the lights went out and the real fight began. Emergency lighting bathed the throne room in hellish red as backup. Power systems engaged. The Empress's bioluminescent patches pulsed frantically, trying to coordinate her scattered guards, but the cascading quantum failure had disrupted their neural link network. For the first time in her reign, her forces were operating blind. Cross rolled behind a crystalline column as plasma bolts seared the air where he'd been standing. The Nexari rifle felt alien in his hands, its grip designed for chitinous fingers. But 6 months of careful observation had taught him how their weapons functioned. The first guard rounded the column expecting to find a cowering translator. Instead, he found a Terran Special Operations veteran who'd been pretending to be helpless for half a year. 3 shots center mass. The guard dropped without a sound. Perimeter positions compromised. Voss's voice whispered across their private CUM channel, the neural link finally active after months of forced silence. For guards down, Empress retreating to secondary chamber. Cross felt the familiar rush of their tactical synchronization returning, like slipping on a glove that fit perfectly. They'd operated together for 3 years before the ambush, their partnership forged in the crucible of a dozen Black Ops missions. The Nexari had captured their bodies, but they'd never understood the true nature of the bond they were trying to break. Weapons cache, northeast corner, he sub-vocalized, trusting her enhanced hearing to pick up the barely audible words. Saw them move it there last week, confirmed. 20 seconds. The Empress's voice boomed through the chamber's speakers, switching to the common tongue for their benefit. You cannot escape, humans. This station contains 10,000 of my warriors. Your little display has only postponed your inevitable fate. Cross smiled grimly as he stripped the fallen guard's equipment. The Empress was right about the numbers, but she was wrong about inevitability. Humans had a saying that the Nexari had never learned to understand. It's not the size of the dog in the fight. It's the size of the fight in the dog. Incoming, Voss warned, her voice tight with concentration. The next wave of guards came in formation, their movements coordinated by hand signals instead of neural link. Professional soldiers, not the ceremonial guards from the throne room. Cross counted 12, all armed with the newer plasma rifles that could punch through titanium armor. He had exactly 7 shots left in his commandeered weapon. Remember the Helix Station job? He asked, sliding a fresh power cell into the rifle. The one where you said my plan was insane. That one. I'm hurt. It worked perfectly. Cross triggered the chamber's environmental controls, sending a cascade of emergency foam into the air. The thick white substance was designed to seal hull breaches, but it also blocked thermal imaging and dampened sound. The advancing guards found themselves moving through a maze of hardening foam, their visibility reduced to mere meters. This is insane, he muttered, charging toward the nearest cluster of enemy signatures. That's why it'll work, Voss replied, her voice carrying the sound of her own weapon's fire. Besides, you said I belonged to you. Time to prove it. The foam parted around him like water as he dove into the enemy formation. The Nexari guards had trained for thousands of scenarios, but none of them involved two humans who'd learned to function as a single tactical unit. Every shot cross-fired was synchronized with Voss's movements, every step calculated to support her advance. The Empress's roar of fury echoed through the station as her elite guards fell one by one. She'd expected her prisoners to beg for mercy, to offer information in exchange for quick deaths. Instead, she'd awakened something that her species had never encountered: humans who refused to stay broken. The weapons cache yielded to pulse, rifles, a crate of grenades, and something that made Cross's blood sing with anticipation: a Terran combat knife, still bearing the serial number of a destroyed cruiser. The Empress had been collecting trophies from her victories, never realizing she was arming her enemies. Thermal imaging shows 47 guards converging on our position, Voss reported, her voice steady despite the blood seeping from her wounded wrists. They're sealing the primary exits. Cross tested the knife's balance, muscle memory flooding back as the familiar weight settled in his palm. Then we don't use the primary exits. Remember the maintenance shafts, the ones that lead directly to the reactor core, the ones that would be suicide for anyone without radiation shielding. Those would be the ones. Voss's laugh was sharp and dangerous. I take back what I said about your plans being insane. This is so far beyond insane it's achieved enlightenment. The Nexari had designed their station to be escape-proof, but they'd built it assuming their prisoners would think like them logically, predictably, with appropriate regard for self-preservation. They'd never considered that humans might choose certain death over continued captivity. Empress, Cross called out, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. I know you can hear me. I want to make you a deal. The response came through the speakers, heavy with contempt. You are in no position to bargain. Human, surrender now, and your deaths will be swift. Here's my counteroffer, Cross continued, pulling the pin from a grenade. You've held me prisoner for 6 months. You've tortured information out of me, used me as a tool, treated me like a pet, but the worst thing you did was chain her to that pillar. He released the grenade's safety lever, starting the countdown. You made her watch while you broke me. Day after day. You made her think she was helpless. You made her think she was alone. That was a mistake. A grenade detonated in the center of the weapons cache, sending a chain reaction through the stored munitions. The explosion was carefully calculated enough to collapse the access tunnel behind them, but not enough to breach the station's hull. The Empress's guards found themselves cut off from their quarry, forced to take the long way around. Maintenance shaft, now, Voss ordered, her tactical instincts taking over. We have maybe 3 minutes before they recalculate our position. The shaft was barely wide enough for a human body, its walls lined with radiation warning symbols in a dozen different languages. The Nexari had built it as a last resort access route, never expecting anyone to use it voluntarily. The first waves of radiation hit them as they crawled deeper into the station's heart. Cross, Voss said quietly, you know we're not walking away from this. I know. The radiation levels in here would kill us in hours, even with shielding. Without it, I know. She was quiet for a moment, the only sound their breathing and the distant hum of the reactor core. So why are we doing this? Cross paused in his crawling, turning to meet her eyes in the dim emergency lighting. Because they chained you to a pillar. Because they thought they owned us. Because every human who comes after us deserves to know that we don't break. And because the reactor core has a manual override, Voss added, understanding flooding her. Features if we can reach the control chamber. The station's main power grid runs through here. Take out the reactor, and 10,000 Nexari warriors become 10,000 sitting ducks for the next Terran patrol. The next patrol won't arrive for 3 months. Then we'll give them 3 months to think about what they've done. Behind them, the sound of cutting tools echoed through the collapsed tunnel. The Empress's guards were coming, but they would be too late. The humans were already dead from radiation exposure, they just hadn't stopped moving yet. The reactor chamber opened. Before them, like a cathedral of destruction, its fusion core pulsing with the light of a captive star. Radiation levels spiked their borrowed sensors into the red zone, but Cross barely noticed. His body was already shutting down, cellular damage cascading through his system with every heartbeat. Beside him, Voss moved with the same mechanical precision, her training overriding her body's protests. "Manual override is there," she said, pointing to a console positioned deliberately close to the reactor's housing. "The Nexari designed it so anyone using it would die from exposure. They never expected anyone to try. They never met humans," Cross replied, his voice already roughening from radiation damage. "Contact Earth Command. Tell them what we found here." Voss activated their emergency beacon, transmitting everything they'd learned about Nexari fleet movements, tactical doctrine, and technological capabilities. The signal would take weeks to reach human space, but it would eventually arrive. The intelligence they'd gathered would save thousands of lives. "Transmission complete," she reported. "Earth Command has our full tactical analysis. The reactor core's manual override required 2 people to operate simultaneously, their handprints verified by biometric scanners. The Nexari had built it as a failsafe against sabotage, never realizing they were creating the perfect weapon for a bonded pair." "The Empress is still broadcasting," Voss noted, monitoring the station's communication channels. "She's calling for reinforcements from the entire sector fleet." "How many ships?" 300, maybe more. "They're treating this like a full-scale rebellion." Cross felt something that might have been satisfaction if he'd had the energy for it. "Good, let them come. When they arrive, they'll find a dead station and a reactor core that's been manually overridden. They'll spend months trying to figure out how humans destroyed an entire command facility. And while they're distracted by us, the real counterattack can begin." They positioned themselves at the override console, their hands hovering over the activation switches. The radiation was cooking them from the inside out, but their enhanced training kept them functional for a few more minutes. Long enough to finish what they'd started. Cross Voss said quietly, "I want you to know something." "What?" "When you said I belonged to you, back in the throne room, I've belonged to you for 3 years, since the first mission. I just never said it." He smiled, the expression probably invisible through the radiation burns covering his face. "I know, I've belonged to you just as long. The irony is perfect, isn't it? They chained me to a pillar, tried to break our bond, and instead they gave us exactly what we needed to destroy them. The chains were never going to hold you. You're too strong for that. We're too strong for that." The override console beeped, indicating that both operators were in position. One touch would begin the cascade shutdown, overloading the reactor's containment systems and turning the station into a miniature supernova. The explosion would be visible from 3 systems away, a funeral pyre for 10,000 Nexari warriors, and a beacon of defiance for humanity. "On 3, Voss asked. "On 3, 1, 2, 3. They pressed the switches simultaneously, their movements perfectly synchronized even as their bodies failed. The reactor core screamed as containment fields collapsed, fusion reactions spiraling beyond control. Emergency klaxons wailed throughout the station as the Empress's voice rose in fury and desperation. "You have doomed yourselves for nothing," she shrieked across the communication channels. "Your species will still fall. Your worlds will still burn." Cross found the strength for one last transmission. "Maybe. But they'll remember that we didn't go quietly. They'll remember that humans don't break, no matter what you do to us." The reactor core reached critical mass, its light becoming too bright to look at directly. In the last seconds before the explosion, Cross felt Voss's hand find his bare fingers intertwining as they'd done during their first mission together. The chains were broken. The explosion tore through the station like the breath of an angry god, bulkheads peeling away like paper in a hurricane. The Empress's personal command center, shielded by layers of quantum armor, survived the initial blast but shook like a leaf in a stellar storm. Emergency lighting flickered as power systems failed throughout the facility. "Damage report." The Empress shrieked, her bioluminescent patches flaring white-hot with rage. "How many dead?" "Sectors 7 through 12 are completely gone," her chief tactician reported, his voice steady despite the chaos. "The reactor core breach destroyed 40% of the station. Casualty estimates 4,000 dead, another 3,000 missing, and the humans vaporized at ground zero." They were standing next to the reactor when it overloaded. The Empress's mandibles clicked in a rhythm that spoke of barely contained violence. 6 months of careful interrogation, 6 months of breaking down the translator's resistance, and in the end, they'd given her nothing but death and destruction. The female had been in captivity for less than a day, yet somehow she'd coordinated with the male to destroy nearly half the station. "Replay the final transmission," she ordered. The human male's voice filled the command center, distorted by radiation but still defiant. "Maybe, but they'll remember that we didn't go quietly. They'll remember that humans don't break, no matter what you do to us." The words hung in the air like a curse. The Empress had conquered 17 species in her rise to power, had broken the will of entire civilizations, but she'd never encountered anything like this. The humans had chosen death over surrender, had somehow turned their capture into a weapon against their captors. "Your Majesty," the tactician continued, "the explosion was detected by our deep space sensors. Every ship in the sector will have seen it. The humans will know what happened here. Then we accelerate the timeline. Send word to the fleet commanders. All human colonies are to be pacified immediately. No more prisoners, no more interrogations. We burn their worlds to bedrock. That will require deploying the full sector fleet, over 300 ships. Then deploy them. I want every human world reduced to ash within the month." The Empress turned to stare at the tactical display, watching the spread of Nexari forces across human space. The 2 prisoners had cost her nearly half her command staff, and a significant portion of her station, but their sacrifice would be meaningless. Their species would still fall, their worlds would still burn, and their defiance would be forgotten in the ashes of their civilization, or so she thought. "Your Majesty," the communications officer interrupted, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the Hegemony Command. They're requesting immediate debriefing on the station's destruction." The Empress's blood turned cold. The Hegemony had been clear in their instructions. The human translator was to be kept alive until he'd revealed the location of every Terran military installation. His death would be seen as a catastrophic failure of command. "Tell them the situation is under control," she ordered. "The humans attempted to escape and were eliminated. We're pursuing other intelligence sources." "Yes, Your Majesty. Should I mention the casualties?" "No, the Hegemony doesn't need to know how many warriors we lost to dying humans." But even as she gave the order, the Empress knew it was too late. Word of the station's destruction would spread through the fleet, and with it, whispers of how 2 humans had accomplished what entire enemy fleets had failed to do. The prisoners had wanted to be remembered, had wanted their defiance to inspire others. They were about to get their wish. "Tactical analysis of the escape attempt," she demanded. "How did they coordinate their actions? How did they know about the reactor override?" The tactician's patches dimmed with uncertainty. "We're still analyzing the data, Your Majesty, but preliminary reports suggest they had detailed knowledge of our security protocols and station layout. The male may have been gathering intelligence throughout his captivity. 6 months of intelligence gathering, and we never suspected that." Interrogation sessions showed him to be broken, compliant. He answered every question, provided translation services without resistance. There was no indication of deception. The Empress felt something she hadn't experienced in decades. Doubt if the humans could maintain such perfect deception for 6 months, if they could coordinate complex operations while appearing to be helpless prisoners. What else were they capable of? "Double the security protocols on all human captives," she ordered. "Neural extractors only know more live interrogations. And send a message to the fleet. The human resistance may be more organized than we believed." As her officers hurried to comply, the Empress remained staring at the tactical display. The burning wreckage of her station was already fading from the sensors, but she knew the memory would haunt her for years to come. 2 humans had entered her throne room in chains, and they'd left it as legends. 3 weeks after the station's destruction, Lieutenant Commander Reese Morrison sat in the cramped communications bay of the cruiser Defiant, monitoring deep space. Transmissions with the kind of focused intensity that came from knowing lives depended on every decoded signal. The Nexari had been jamming human communications for months, but occasionally something slipped through their electronic nets. "Contact," she announced, her voice cutting through the bridge's ambient noise. "Emergency beacon, Terran origin. It's from the Outer Rim." Captain Elena Vasquez materialized behind Morrison's station, her weathered face creased with concern. The Outer Rim had been under Nexari control for 6 months, and no Terran signals had emerged from that region since the initial invasion. Source unknown, but the encryption is military-grade, command-level clearance. Morrison's fingers flew over her console, running the signal through every decryption algorithm in the ship's database. "Captain, this is massive. Tactical data. fleet movements, technology assessments, ... It's everything. How much data? 6 months worth. Complete intelligence package on Nexari operations, including... Morrison paused, her face going pale, including the location of their primary command station. Vasquez felt her heart skip. The Nexari had been careful to keep their command structure hidden, operating through a network of mobile bases and encrypted communications. A fixed command station would be an unprecedented target. Verify the source, she ordered. I want to know where this came from. Morrison's analysis took another hour, cross-referencing signal patterns and transmission protocols. When she looked up, her expression was grim. Captain, the source appears to be Captain Valerian Cross and Commander Lyra Voss. They were listed as killed in action 6 months ago. The Iron Wolf. Vasquez had heard the stories. Voss's single ship raids had become legendary throughout the fleet. Are you certain? Biometric verification confirms it. They were both alive when this transmission was sent. The timestamp shows it was broadcast from the coordinates of a massive energy explosion detected 3 weeks ago. The implications hit Vasquez like a physical blow. 2 of the fleet's best officers had been held prisoner for 6 months, gathering intelligence until they could find a way to transmit it home. The explosion that had destroyed the Nexari command station hadn't been an accident, it had been a suicide mission. Get me Fleet Command, she ordered. Priority Alpha transmission. And Morrison, make sure this intelligence package gets to every ship in the fleet. Those 2 officers died to give us this information. We're going to make sure it counts. The signal that reached Earth Command 12 hours later contained more than just tactical data. Hidden within the intelligence package was a personal message from Cross and Voss, recorded in their final moments. To any human who receives this transmission, we were captured 6 months ago during a routine patrol. The Nexari have been using us to gather intelligence on Terran capabilities and fleet positions. We've learned everything we could about their operations, their technology, and their plans. They think they understand us. They think they can break us by chaining us, by torturing us, by making us watch each other suffer. They're wrong. We are stronger than they know, and we are more connected than they can comprehend. Use this information, find their weaknesses, hit them where they're vulnerable. And remember, no matter how dark things get, no matter how hopeless the situation seems, we don't break. We don't surrender. We don't go quietly into the night. We belong to each other. We belong to humanity, and we will never, ever, belong to them. End transmission. The message spread through the fleet like wildfire, ship to ship, base to base, until every human in the galaxy knew the story of 2 officers who turned their captivity into a weapon. The tactical data enabled a dozen successful raids on Nexari supply lines. The intelligence on their fleet movements allowed Terran forces to avoid 3 major ambushes, but more than that, the message itself became a rallying cry. Humans who'd been demoralized by months of Nexari victories suddenly remembered why they were fighting. The story of the chained prisoners who'd broken free sparked uprisings on occupied worlds and inspired acts of defiance that the Nexari couldn't understand or predict. Admiral Chen received the intelligence package at Terra Command and immediately began planning Operation Chainbreaker, coordinated strike against every Nexari installation identified in the data. The operation would involve over 100 ships and would be the largest human military action since the war began. They gave us the keys to the kingdom, she told her staff. Now we use them. The Empress had wanted to break the human spirit by making examples of her prisoners. Instead, she'd created martyrs whose sacrifice would inspire a rebellion that would span 1,000 worlds. The chains were broken. The hunt was becoming a war. Admiral Chen stood before the holographic display in Terra Command's war room, watching as red dots representing Nexari installations flickered across the star map. The intelligence from Cross and Voss had revealed a network of supply bases, communication relays, and command centers that the enemy had assumed were invisible. Now, 67 ships of the Terran fleet were moving into position to strike simultaneously. Operation Chainbreaker commences in T-30 minutes, she announced to the assembled commanders. Every target hit simultaneously, no warnings, no mercy. The Nexari wanted to break us by making examples of our people. Time to show them what happens when humans make examples of theirs. The strikes began at 0800 hours, synchronized across 12 star systems. The Nexari garrison at Kepler 442 never saw the plasma torpedoes coming. Their sensor arrays overwhelmed by the new jamming techniques Cross and Voss had identified. The supply depot at Wolf 359 erupted in a chain reaction of explosions as human marines used the station's own security protocols against it at Proxima Centauri. The communication hub that had been coordinating Nexari operations across 3 sectors went dark in a blaze of fusion fire. The commanders monitoring the facility's destruction didn't broadcast their success. They transmitted the voices of the human prisoners who'd been held there, now freed and very much alive. "This is for the Iron Wolf," Captain Martinez whispered, as his ship's weapons reduced a Nexari cruiser to scrap metal. "This is for Captain Cross." The attacks weren't random violence, they were surgical strikes designed to cripple the Nexari command structure. Every target had been selected based on the intelligence package, every approach route planned using the tactical data that two dying officers had transmitted with their last breath. The Nexari found themselves fighting an enemy that suddenly knew their every weakness. "Status report," the Empress demanded from her temporary command center, her bioluminescent patches flashing in patterns that spoke of barely controlled fury. "How many installations have we lost?" 43 confirmed destroyed, 15 more under attack, her chief tactician reported. "The humans are hitting everything simultaneously. They know our security codes, our patrol routes, our backup protocols. It's as if they have complete intelligence on all our operations." "The prisoners," the Empress whispered, the truth hitting her like a physical blow. "They were gathering intelligence for 6 months. Everything they saw, everything they heard. Your Majesty, the prisoners died in the reactor explosion. They couldn't have transmitted anything. Check the communication logs, every transmission from the station in the past month. If they found a way to send a signal." The analysis took 3 hours, but the results were undeniable. Hidden within routine maintenance transmissions, disguised as background radiation, camouflaged as reactor harmonics, was a complete intelligence package detailing every aspect of Nexari operations. The 2 humans had been transmitting data for weeks, using techniques so sophisticated that the station's security systems had never detected them. "Brilliant," the Empress admitted grudgingly. "They turned our own equipment against us. The interrogation sessions, the tours of the facility, the conversations they overheard, it was all intelligence gathering. We thought we were breaking them, but they were studying us, Your Majesty. We're receiving reports from across the sector. Human forces are broadcasting the names of the prisoners who died on this station. They're calling it a martyrdom, a sacrifice that enabled this counterattack." The Empress felt something cold settle in her thorax. The humans weren't just fighting back, they were turning the story of their captured officers into a weapon. Every successful raid was dedicated to the memory of the 2 prisoners. Every victory proof that their sacrifice had meaning. "Recall the sector fleet," she ordered. "All ships, defensive positions, and send a message to the Hegemony Command. We need reinforcements. The human resistance is more organized than we believed. Your Majesty, the Hegemony has been monitoring our communications. They're displeased with recent developments." The Empress's blood turned to ice. The Hegemony had invested significant resources in her sector conquest, and the sudden reversal of fortune would not be viewed favorably. Her failure to properly secure the prisoners had cost them dozens of installations and hundreds of ships. "How displeased they're sending an assessment team to evaluate your command effectiveness." The Empress understood the implication. In the Hegemony, failed commanders didn't face demotion, they faced the neural expectors. The same fate she'd planned for the human prisoners would now await her if she couldn't restore order to the sector. "Double the security on all remaining installations," she ordered. "No more prisoners, no more interrogations. If we capture humans, execute them immediately. And put a bounty on any human ship. I want them running scared, not planning counterattacks." But even as she gave the orders, the Empress knew it was too late. The humans had turned their imprisonment into victory, had transformed their chains into weapons. The story of their defiance was spreading across the galaxy, inspiring uprisings that the Nexari couldn't predict or contain. But the 2 prisoners had achieved something that neither torture nor execution could have prevented. They had become legends. Hegemony assessment team arrived at the Empress's makeshift command center aboard a vessel that made her greatest dreadnoughts look like patrol boats. The Dominion was a kilometer-long manifestation of absolute power, its hull studded with weapons that could crack planets and sensors that could detect a whisper across star systems. When beings of such magnitude came calling, it was rarely for pleasant conversation. High Arbiter Vex Hylan materialized in the Empress's war room through a cascade of quantum light, his form shifting between dimensions in a way that hurt to observe directly. The hegemony's senior representatives were beings of pure thought housed in crystalline matrices, their consciousness so advanced that physical reality was merely a suggestion they chose to acknowledge. Empress, the Arbiter's voice, resonated through dimensions, carrying harmonics that made the station's bulkheads vibrate. Explain to us how two primitive mammals managed to destroy 43 installations and cripple your entire sector fleet. The Empress forced herself to remain steady, though her bioluminescent patches flickered with barely suppressed terror. The humans possess capabilities we underestimated. Their mental bonds allow for coordination that silence. The word carried enough psychic weight to make the Empress's nervous system scream. We have reviewed the data. 2 prisoners, held for 6 months, managed to gather complete intelligence on your operations while appearing to be broken and compliant. This represents a failure of command, so catastrophic that it defies explanation. The Arbiter's form shifted, becoming more solid, more threatening. You were tasked with conquering a species of primitive mammals. Instead, you have created martyrs whose sacrifice inspired a rebellion that spans 50 star systems. Human raids have increased by 300%. Their recruitment numbers have tripled. Entire sectors that were pacified are now in open revolt. The intelligence they transmitted was extensive, the Empress protested. But we've adapted our security protocols. The counterattacks are being contained. Contained. The Arbiter's laugh was like the sound of dying stars. Show her the reports. The holographic display shifted to show the galactic situation map. Red zones indicating human resistance had spread like a cancer across the outer rim. Green zones marking necessary control were shrinking by the day. Most disturbing of all, yellow zones representing contested space were appearing in sectors that had been firmly under hegemony control for decades. The story of your 2 prisoners has inspired uprisings among 17 different species. The Arbiter continued. The Altarians have declared independence. The Centauri rebels have launched their first successful raid in 3 years. The vegan colonies have begun sabotaging their own infrastructure rather than submit to occupation. The Empress felt her world collapsing. The humans hadn't just struck back. They'd ignited a galaxy-wide rebellion. The story of 2 officers who'd turned their captivity into a weapon had become a rallying cry for every oppressed species in hegemony space. The damage assessment is complete, the Arbiter announced. Your sector command has lost 43 installations, 67 ships, and the compliance of 12 subject species. The humans have gained complete intelligence on our operations, tactical parity in 3 ship classes, and most damaging of all, they have gained something we cannot quantify or counter. Hope I can restore order, the Empress said desperately. Give me additional resources, and I'll crush their resistance. No, the Arbiter's form began to fade, becoming translucent. You will be reassigned to a mining colony in the outer darkness. Your replacement will attempt to salvage what remains of this sector. Who? The Empress whispered. Someone who understands that the greatest victories are often won not through conquest, but through understanding. Someone who realizes that these humans possess something we have never encountered before. The Arbiter's final words echoed through the chamber as his form dissipated. They do not break, they do not surrender, and they do not forget. Alone in her command center, the former Empress stared at the tactical display showing the spreading rebellion. 2 humans, chained to a pillar, had somehow turned their imprisonment into the spark that would ignite a galactic war. They'd belonged to each other, belonged to their species, and in the end, they'd made it clear that they would never belong to anyone else. The hegemony would send new commanders, new fleets, new strategies. But the damage was done. The story of the Iron Wolf and her partner had spread beyond the reach of censorship or suppression. Every human who heard their names would remember that chains could be broken, that captivity could become victory, that love could triumph over fear. The hunt was ending, but the war they'd started would burn for generations. 5 years after the destruction of the Nexari command station, Admiral Chen stood in the memorial garden on New Terra, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The war still raged across the galaxy, but humanity was no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting for liberation, not just of their own species, but of every world that had suffered under hegemony rule. The memorial before her was simple. 2 interlocked circles of black stone, representing the unbreakable bond between Captain Valerian Cross and Commander Lyra Voss. Their names were etched in letters that caught the morning light, and beneath them, the words that had become humanity's battle cry: we belong to each other, we belong to humanity, and we will never, ever belong to them. Admiral, came a voice behind her. Chen turned to see Captain Morrison, now commanding the newest class of Terran dreadnoughts. The Altarian delegation is requesting permission to visit the memorial. Chen smiled. The Altarians had been among the first species to join the rebellion, inspired by the story of two humans who'd chosen death over surrender. Their warriors now fought alongside Terran forces, their tactics adapted from the lessons learned in that final transmission. "Grant permission," she said. "The memorial belongs to everyone who refuses to accept chains." Morrison nodded and departed, leaving Chen alone with her thoughts. The war had changed everything. The hegemony's monolithic control was cracking as species after species declared independence. The Nexari had been pushed back to their core systems, their empress replaced by a succession of commanders who couldn't solve the fundamental problem. How do you conquer a species that turns captivity into victory? The answer, Chen knew, was that you don't. The lesson of the chained prisoners had spread far beyond humanity. Every species that heard their story learned something the hegemony couldn't understand, that the strongest chains were the ones that bound people together, not the ones that held them apart. "They'd be proud, you know," said a familiar voice. Chen turned to see Dr. Elizabeth Torres, the psychologist who'd first analyzed the transmitted intelligence package, Cross and Voss. "They'd be amazed at what their sacrifice accomplished." Would they, Chen asked, or would they just see it as two soldiers doing their duty? Both, probably. That's what made them special. They never saw themselves as heroes. They just saw something that needed to be done and did it. Chen nodded, her eyes returning to the memorial. The intelligence gathered by the two prisoners had enabled Operation Chainbreaker, which had led to the Liberation Wars, which had sparked the Great Rebellion, a chain of events that stretched across the galaxy, all beginning with two people who'd refused to let their captors define them. "The new recruits still ask about them," Torres continued. "Want to know what kind of people they were, what made them so strong. What do you tell them? That they were human, that they loved each other and their species enough to die for both, that they understood something the hegemony never could, that chains don't make you weak, they make you realize how strong you really are." Chen spent another hour at the memorial, watching as delegations from a dozen species arrived to pay their respects. Altarians, Centauri, vegans, even some former Nexari who'd broken free from their empress's control. All of them united by the story of two humans who'd turned their imprisonment into a weapon of liberation. The holographic display in her command center would show the current tactical situation when she returned. 300 star systems in open rebellion, hegemony forces in retreat across 4 sectors, and a growing alliance of free species that called themselves the Chainbreaker. The war that had begun with 2 prisoners chained to a pillar was reshaping the galaxy, but here, in the quiet of the memorial garden, Chen could feel the presence of something more important than tactical victories or strategic advantages. She could feel the unbreakable bond between 2 people who'd refused to let their captors break them, who'd turned their love into a force that could crack the foundations of an empire. "They belong to each other," she whispered, repeating the words that had become legend. "They belong to humanity, and they will never, ever belong to them." The sun climbed higher, painting the memorial in brilliant light. Somewhere in the galaxy, new battles were being fought, new chains were being broken, new stories of defiance were being written. The legend of the Iron Wolf and her partner would endure, inspiring generations of fighters who understood that the strongest bonds were forged not in comfort, but in the crucible of shared struggle. The Empress had chained them to a pillar, thinking she could break them. Instead, she'd given them exactly what they needed to break her empire. The hunt was over. The war was won, and the chains would never hold them again. In memory of all who refuse to break, who choose love over fear, and who understand that belonging to each other is the greatest freedom of all.